Hello, gent.
Hello, guys.
Hey, Phil. Hey, Paul.
Are live back for another episode of The Trouble with Writing. How's it going today, gents? What's happening in your neck of the
Very
woods?
well. Gosh,
Going
not
well.
much. Halloween is coming. I love it.
Halloween is coming. Why don't we remind everyone, where is our neck of the woods? We always talk about where we are. Paul, you're based in Canada.
Based in Canada on the west coast in a city called Vancouver. Yeah, I've been here for 30 years, but I grew up in Toronto in the central part of Canada. But here is much nicer.
Cool. What do you
how about
love
you, Pete?
What do you love about Vancouver? Just before we move on.
Well, I love its proximity to both the ocean and the mountains. They're right. We're basically, the city is right on the edge of the continent. So the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, fall off, go into the ocean, and you've got access to both. It's really nice. And it's a very multicultural city. One of the most multicultural cities in the world, in fact. So I like that. I like those elements for sure.
Great.
How about you, Pete?
Sounds good.
Yeah, so I live in Chile, on the coast in Valparaiso. It's the central region. And yeah, I came here originally in 2006. And yes, I really like living here. It's great to be by the seaside. Something that struck me when I first came here was that we have a lot of hills in Valparaiso, and there are a lot of coloured houses and murals. There's some very arty places, and also if you go up along the coast, another city about 15 minutes on the metro from Valparaiso, which is called Viña del Mar, and it's completely different. It's a wealthier city. It's the people are different. It's got a whole different feel to it, and I've always found that contrast really, really different, and it's nice because you can go from one city to the other and get a whole different experience.
That was cool. Sounds good.
great.
Like a brother and a sister town almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody who's joined us, thanks. We're going to bring in our guest in just a minute and talk about writing in two languages. And tell us what you love about where you live as well. I've heard from Pete and Paul.
We have Nayana from Sri Lanka. Great to have you here,
brilliant.
Nayana.
Welcome along. Let's look through some of where the guests are from.
By the way, Phil, where are you situated or located?
Yes, I should tell everyone, I'm from the UK, but I live in the Canary Islands because I like canaries. No, I like hot weather and the nice location that the Canary Islands is in. I really like the sea, I suppose. Like, I really like the size of Gran Canaria, where I live. It's a almost completely circular island, which is conical because it's volcanic. And if you go up to the top in the middle of the island, you can see absolutely everywhere. And it's just it's a nice size to explore without it getting too boring because it's big enough, But I'm coming from the UK and like being on other islands, I've always liked island life. Great. Wonder if we have any other island livers out there. All right. Well, we've got quite a few people with us now. I think 30 or so. So thanks for joining, everyone. Let's talk about writing in two languages, which I'm sure many of you do. Today's guest is Diego Perez. He's a Brazilian Portuguese localization expert for video games. He is a marketing translator, a mentor for game localizers, a content writer in English, and he's also a guitar player and a wizard. Diego, welcome to the show.
Welcome, Diego.
How are you doing?
Hey, Diego.
Out of nowhere.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Like I mentioned on the backstage, I'm a big fan of your podcast. I'm always listening to it. So
Yeah.
really glad to be featured here today.
Thanks
Great
very
to have
much
you.
for joining us, Diego.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Why don't you tell everyone about where you live and why, or what you like about it?
Okay. Well, I'm based in São Paulo. I was born and raised in Rio de Janeiro, sunny Rio de Janeiro. And now I've been living in São Paulo for about 9 years. Well, today is a cloudy day here, no rain, but it's a typical gray São Paulo day.
Great, sounds good. Just bring a few of the comments up. Let's kick off. Diego, tell us which of your many types of work have you been doing today? What are you working on at the moment?
Well, today, just before the podcast, I was working on the localization of Kenshi 2, which is one of my main activities this year. I've been working as a part-time in-house translator in-house. Kenshi 2 has been developed by a video game studio based in the UK. They are completely independent, and it's been really nice working in this project. It's really a blast for creative translators in general. We have a lot of room for creativity, a lot of support from the writers, from developers, designers. So this was what I was working on, and probably work a bit more after we're done today. I'm also doing some editing for other video games, 2 other mobile games that I've been editing on a freelance basis. And just recently, I also got an invitation to write content blog posts in English, which is really an achievement for me. I'm really glad to having reached this point in my career. And yeah, other than work, I've also been cycling around. Sometimes cycling for 40 kilometers, and so trying to get into shape and doing some exercise.
I have a question,
Always
Diego.
good.
Diego, can you explain for me, because I'm not familiar with the video game world, what does it mean to localize? What is the process of localization?
Sure. This is a very good question. We get that a lot because sometimes localization just sounds like a buzzword, but it actually isn't. It is quite different. The process of localization basically means that you are going to make that content relevant for a particular locale, right? So if the game contains cultural references from the original language, for example, then you're going to try to adapt that into your local language and other cultural references as well. Even for sometimes one thing that really frequently happens when translating is, for example, we have game events that are, for example, winter event. But when winter in the northern hemisphere means we are actually in the summer in the southern hemisphere. So sometimes we have to do that kind of localization to switch around jokes and references so that they are relevant for the target audience. The end goal is to make the game feel like it was originally conceived in the target audience language instead of just transposing the text from one language to another. So that's the process of what localization means.
Great. Fascinating.
Yeah. But actually it involves also some adaptation of the visual design in some cases, especially when we're talking about right to left languages, right? So sometimes you need to adapt the whole interface, or you have to adapt the visual design of the game. Well, we don't usually have that kind of trouble when bringing into Brazilian Portuguese because the culture is more or less similar, except for references, of course. But it gets trickier when we are talking about bringing that game into Eastern cultures or in the Middle East that have other cultural values, other restrictions, even legal restrictions. So all this process of adapting adapting that product to a particular market, that's called localization, and that's why it goes beyond even the written work of translation and steps into other areas as well, like technical adaptations, visual adaptations, legal adaptations too.
It's good to get some clarity on that, because I think with language teaching, learning, and the language industry, right, like translation, there's so many acronyms and so much jargon, like transcreation and translation and localization. All the shuns, like what do they mean? And it's good to get some answers on that. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah. Cheers.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Diego. So on the topic of translation, localization, I wanted to ask you, so more translators and localizers are becoming content creators, and they mostly use English to write. Why is this?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question as well. I guess basically because of the wider audience that you can reach with English. I think that would be the first thing that comes to mind. But there are other reasons as well. So English basically has been the pivot language for localization, and anything that wants to go global, they will eventually translate into English. And usually the English source language is used as the source material for translating into other language. So let's suppose if a game is developed in Germany, they want to look for German translators into Portuguese, right? They will look for German translators into English, and once that that project has been translated into English, then it will spread out to all other languages. And I think the work demand we see right now for English is just enormous. So I've met a lot of colleagues who were once translators from German, from French, from Spanish, Italian, and they to keep the work coming to them, they had to start learning English and trying to find work from that language so that they could have work, basically. And so basically the whole industry, especially the localization industry, whether it's game localization or software and app and website localization, they will eventually use English to reach other languages. So and what the result of that is that basically translators, they will try to use English to reach those markets, right? So and there's another aspect too, which is more related to the economic aspect of things. It's when you consider that a lot of us translators come from developing countries or countries with a weaker economy than some countries in Europe and the United States or Canada. And when they speak when they write in their native language, for example, on LinkedIn, they are not really reaching their ideal client. They are probably reaching their own agencies that are based in their own country, which will probably pay in local currencies. So they will not get as much from the work they're doing than they could. So when they switch to English, then they can reach basically translation agencies everywhere, all around the country, all around the world, and even, of course, direct clients too. So they will just they just use English to do that. And one thing that happens to me in that process, when I started writing on LinkedIn and showing my face as a translator, I wasn't aiming to become to pivot or to diversify my services as a content writer. I was just trying to make my work known for a bigger audience, right? So it took me some courage to put myself out there as a non-native English speaker. But eventually, that attracted me a wealth of opportunities, including this content writing gig that I landed recently. And this has got me thinking that I, beyond being a translator, I'm becoming more of a multilingual writer that can diversify my services for whether as a translator or as a content writer and SEO specialist. There are a lot of things you can do when you think of writing. When you think of writing in a digital environment, there's just so much opportunities out there, and I'm really excited to keep developing my English writing skills to reach those opportunities, right? So that I'm not so restricted to translation. And if you have, a lot of services you can offer, you will not feel compelled to accept an offer that you are not really that doesn't make much sense for you as a business, right? So I think that's basically it. Yeah.
Diego, you
Thanks to
mentioned
everyone.
developing. Sorry, go ahead, Phil.
Sorry, Paul. One second. I was just going to say thanks to everyone who's been chipping in on the comments. We've been shining them on screen. People from all over. Lots of people involved in translation, localization, and other writing stuff. Remember that if you've got a question for any of us, Pete, Paul, myself, or Diego, just type it into the chat. We will get to them at the end for sure. So anything technical, Brazilian Portuguese based, game localization, wizardry, or just stuff for any of us. Yeah, ask your questions. Paul, what was your question?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, Diego, you mentioned developing your skills. I'm curious, words are so important. They're everything in translation. So what strategies do you use to keep expanding your English vocabulary and Portuguese for that matter? What strategies do you use to develop?
Of course. Well, it's funny because before I became a translator, and I was learning English and still studying the English language at the university level, all the content I would consume in English, right? So games, newspapers, and everything, basically, all the interface in my computer, everything was in English because I really wanted to learn the language, right? So when you were starting learning a language, you want to build your vocabulary, you want to get acquainted with all the idioms and sentence constructions and everything. So that was my focus. But once I started translating, I think like every beginning translator out there, I started getting some feedback that my sentence construction and everything and things like that, they were too literal maybe. So then that got me thinking, okay, so I'm getting, I don't know, I'm getting infected by the English language in my translation. So I have to do something about it. I have to get closer to my native language as well, because that's the language that the audience of my work is consuming or is reading, right? So that's when I made a shift, and I started and I set all my games and my applications, computer software, subtitles. I put everything back in Portuguese because I wanted to see how translation was doing. What was the industry standard for translation, for the terminology that I needed to use in my daily work, and also to spot mistakes, to learn from other people's mistakes, and build my vocabulary in my native language back, right? And start, getting acquainted again with colloquial forms which are very much used in game. We do not shy away from informal language or slang when appropriate. So I did that for many years as I worked in translation. But once I started writing in English on LinkedIn mainly, then I started to notice the other problem, which is, okay, I lack the vocabulary in English. What do I do now? How can I build vocabulary and everything in both languages, right? Because I'm only one person. So basically, the strategy that I built for myself so that I could work in both languages was try to identify very carefully what kind of content and what kind of work I'm doing for each language. So, for example, games and applications, I left that in Portuguese because that's my main focus of work, right? So I'm not doing UX writing or narrative design in English or anything like that, right? So this is my focus as a translator. So when using applications and games, they're all in Portuguese. But when I'm reading blogs or news or anything like that, then I'm doing that in English because that's the kind of content that I'm writing, right? So if I'm writing a blog post on the translation industry, then I have to make a conscious effort of reading translation blogs and everything written in English so that I can develop my vocabulary and see how people are approaching those subjects and get some insights from that. So basically now for probably the first time ever, I'm being very very intentional about the language of the content I'm consuming.
Nice. Thank you.
Yeah, I just had a quick comment on that. I've just added a question, but yeah, I just wanted to say I think it's a common what you said about losing touch with your first language or like losing that richness. I think it's a typical thing for both language teachers that we all have been in some way, and writers that we all are as well. Because if you're using too much very, very readable plain English, then you can lose the richness of vocabulary, and it's something native speakers of all languages should be thinking about as well, whatever language you write in.
Yeah,
I think,
absolutely.
So just to really chip in really quickly, I think Diego's really nailed it when he said Diego, that you consume, so you read the types of texts that you're going to write in that language. I think I explained that really badly. You explained it much better. But see, if you're writing types of text that you write in your own language, you're going to consume those texts in that language. You're going to read those texts, and the same for English. I think that is it's really important. It sounds obvious, but actually, I think a lot of people don't do that.
Yeah.
And once you realize how important that is, then you're on the right track.
Yeah. One thing that's very common. One thing that I learned from with people that I have mentored or other colleagues that I've talked to, they usually they tend to stay in that mindset that, okay, I'm translating from English. I'm working with the English language. So what I must do is I have to get really strong English language skills. But if you are writing in Portuguese, then that's not the way to go, actually, because you need to have your own written work sound native, sound genuine to those people, right? And it's much easier to search or research an idiom in English or anything that's written right in front of you, and then you just get there and search it on the web, than when you are translating, right? And you don't know what you're actually looking for, right? Of course, you can find synonyms and look source material, but if you don't know which idiom you're going to use in your own native language, then you can't find it, right? Because it's just in the back of your mind. So that's why I believe staying in touch with your native language as a translator is really important. That's really what makes your written content read genuinely, read in a like an authentic text for the target audience.
Great point. And I'd like to know about productivity as well. So you've talked about vocab and staying in touch with your first language. When you're writing, when you're constructing text in two languages, how do you stay productive? How do you make sure you're not getting caught between those two and thinking, which task am I going to do first? And how do you approach that, Diego?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. For me, it's much more difficult to shift my mindset to English than the other way around. At least for me, as someone who lives in Brazil, that is in my working language, right? I suppose that for Brazilians who are living in an English-speaking country, that would be a different thing. But for me, shifting to English can be really tricky, right? Because that's not the language I'm usually working with. So I try to do some writing sprints. So that's something that I learned from Philip, actually, who is who is my writing coach. And so just doing writing sprints without paying too much attention to structure or grammar or anything like that. Just writing what's in your mind, and changing the way you think to English. I think that's the tricky part, right? Because when your work will be much slower if you are thinking in Portuguese or your native language, and then trying to bring that into the English language. You would take longer to write, and your text will probably won't sound natural for people who were expecting English text on what is available out there in the internet. So
Great.
so basically just trying to write something without that's not the actual work, right? Just trying to give vent your mind, and reading something in the language you are going to work in. I use that just as warm-ups to change my mindset from one language to another.
I guess it depends how you operate, doesn't it? But I have a lot of people tell me that writing in English is quicker for them. They're like, oh, well, if I have to write, especially a lot of Balkan writers, because they just operate so much in English, and their writing mind is like tuned in to that. And they say, well, if I were to write in Serbian or in Croatian or something, it would take me a lot longer. It would be a lot more difficult. So I'd be interested to see if anyone else out there thinks that or thinks differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, my question is tied into what we're talking about, really. So you said that by writing, sticking to English, right, rather than translating from Portuguese to English, you can save a lot of time. And I wonder how the similarities and the differences between your first language and English can help you to write in English, or how the differences can hinder you. Could you talk to us a little bit about that? Excuse me. So the similarities and differences between your first language and English, how do they help you and how do they hinder you?
Sure, Pete. When you were still taking your first steps into English, into learning how to write in English, not professionally, but more like as in learning a second language, I think translating can be a useful tool, right? Because you still haven't developed that mindset shift we were talking about, right? That thinking in English is not something that you are used to. So I think that that could be useful in a case like that, because you can just lay out the structure, the sentence you want to say, and then you just switch words and everything so that it will read in English. But that approach, well, when you're employing that approach to write professionally or proficiently, or trying to achieve a particular effect, then you have, of course, to pay more attention on on what readers are expecting when they read an English text, right? So you are writing for a global audience. A lot of your readers may not be English speakers. They may not share your native language, or they can be basically all around the world. So you have to strive to reach that standard that's out there in the web, right? So for what really helps me to write in English proficiently, let's say it, is try to identify the ideas of what I want to say in English. So basically, you can even do that in your native language if you want. You can just start doing some bullet points of what you are trying to say, of what are your points and how you're going to present your argument. And then once you have that idea, it's like, you have your language. It's like a Lego building, and you are just disassembling the pieces so that you can identify which are the most important ones, and then you will assemble them back in the language you want to work in. I think that's basically the process that I've been doing, which has been helpful to me. One thing that I remember that really caught my attention when I was doing my coaching sessions with Philip was that basic principle of how English works generally in one sentence, one idea. And in Portuguese, it doesn't really work like that. A well-written text will have really long sentences with complex ideas that are interlinked. And this is we will look at that and say, okay, this text is really well written because the person was able to string so many ideas together, and they are cohesive. But one thing that Portuguese and other Romance languages have is that you have a lot of gender and number marks in words, right? So it's easier to link back or forward in your text than English is, where words they really don't change so much according to gender or to number, right? So an adjective, it will remain in the singular and without any gender marks. But in Portuguese and other Romance languages, you will have such gender marks, and this makes it easier, I think, to write longer sentences that link back and forward in your paragraph or in your own sentence. But in English, when you and I think that's the problem when you write something in your native language and then you translate it into English, because you will follow that same structure, and that can become really hard to read, right? Especially if readers are not acquainted with how the native language, your native language, works, right? Because when they are, I mean, when a fellow Brazilian reads an English text that was also written by a Brazilian, taking that complex structure in mind, I think that there's some similarities there, and maybe you can follow along the text easier than some other language speakers. And that would be my take on it.
Okay. It sounds like one of the considerations you have to address is the aesthetics of the different languages. Like you mentioned, what makes a well-written or beautiful paragraph in Portuguese is going to be different than what constitutes an aesthetically pleasing or well-written paragraph in English, right? Sounds like you have to factor those things in a lot, right?
Yeah, of course, definitely, Paul. This is really something that I think I came to that realization sometime this year, uh, especially because I came from an academic background here in Brazil, where I was writing papers in English and all that, and you know, the academic text has a higher register, and those complex sentences, they are more common than, you know, writing for a blog or writing a social media post. So you know, I was really thinking high of myself. Oh, okay, I can write sentences, 3, 4 sentences. Well, I mean, 3, 4 clauses in one sentence. And but then I realized that it's not really, you know, people don't like reading that. It's just it confuses. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's something that I learned. One another thing that I just remembered from what Pete asked me is about how cognates between English and Portuguese, for example, they can be misleading, right? So
Yeah.
you know, you that the words in English that have a Latin root, or you know, Latinate words, they are from a higher register in English than in Portuguese. And you know, when I was I mean, when I was editing other translators' work, this is something that really caught my mind, because translators, they would just translate those Latinate words literally. And then I thought, oh wait, but the register in the source text is higher than the translated text reads like. So we have to look for a synonym or another structure that will convey that register, instead of just, you know, translated in it literally, right? And the other way around too, right? So when I'm writing in English, I will tend to use those Latinate words as opposed to phrasal verbs or shorter words, and then I have to make a conscious effort of identifying during the editing process, of identifying those words and switching to something that's more familiar or more direct to you know, to what I wrote previously.
I like this. I
Interesting.
mean,
You
this.
talked about
Yeah.
editing there. Sorry, Pete. Go ahead. No, you ask your question.
Yeah, I was just reading
chip in.
the comment on the screen. If a text is going to be in English at the end, then it doesn't make sense to me. It takes more time to write it in my native language and translate it into English. I find it easier to write directly in the language I'm going to publish a text in. And then to tie this back to what we were talking about before, in reading in the language that you're going to write in. So if you're going to write a blog post in English, then it's better to read blog posts in English. I had, an interesting talk with some second language English journalists the other day, and we were talking along these lines. So sometimes you might, and this is specifically for journalists, but could be for other types of writers too. So if a journalist is going to report on a particular topic, they might sometimes read about this topic in their own language if there's more information. So that's, for example, journalists from the Middle East who want to write about the Middle East, they'll find a lot of really useful sources in Arabic. So they go in Arabic, and then it's natural also to think in their first language, in Arabic, and get some early ideas in Arabic. Conversely, if they're reading in English, then it makes sense. It's faster, more natural to get some ideas thinking in English, get some useful vocabulary in English, and go from there. So I think, this is the dynamic, I think, between the two languages. Writers have to think carefully about what they're going to write, what type of text, what's the story, what's the source, is it in English or is it in the first language, and then take it from there and stick to that language in the early stages. It gets a little bit, then they have to combine, right? So they're writing a story in English. Some sources will be in, for these journalists, in Arabic. Other sources will be in English. So yeah, some translation is going to be necessary sometimes. I think what we're saying is that where possible, stick to the language that you're going to write in. It will be much faster. It will be much more natural.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think thinking, if you're going to write in English, thinking in English is key. There's a lot of factors to consider, like you said, with sort of culture. You know, culturally, thinking in Arabic might be quite different to thinking in English. And yeah, what you read, what you write, what your writing intention is. And a lot of these things aren't discussed. They're just like, oh, well, I'm going to write and I can speak good enough English, so I'll just do it in English. It's like, well, if we're at the level above this, we need to be thinking about all those different elements. Yeah, super interesting. Yeah. I wonder if, Diego, you had any other any tips on the editing process? What should multilingual writers consider when they're editing? So if you're writing in a second language.
Well, a common advice I read everywhere on Twitter or LinkedIn, and that piece of the advice is not specifically directed at multilingual writers, but I think that it can be especially useful for that group, is always look at your text and see how you can make a sentence or make an idea shorter or more concise. I think that's what really, changed how I approach the editing process. And also because when you come from university or at school, you are basically trained to bloat your text, right? So you can probably say, "Whoa, I wrote 5 pages," and your target is 5 pages, and not what you are actually going to write and the content of those 5 pages. During those years, I just was really proud that I could write a lot. And then when I started writing on the internet, when you have a very limited time frame to catch and retain the attention of your reader, then you have to switch your whole mindset. So this is one of my main tips for multilingual writers, is how you can make your ideas more to the point. Okay, because that can also be different from your native language, like we were discussing earlier today, right? So maybe in your native language, you are an aesthetically pleasing paragraph, like Paul mentioned, something that strings along different ideas and have complex sentences with a lot of clauses, but that may not be very welcome in English. And I think that could be my second piece of advice, right? Trying to identify where your native language is different from English. Which are the main points of difference? Perhaps that's the vocabulary part of those Latinate words we were talking about. Maybe it's sentence length, or maybe it's just how you present your ideas, or how direct your discourse is. So when you start seeing that difference, and you can start seeing that difference when you are reading text on both languages, and trying to have an active role during your reader to identify how the ideas are presented in one language and the other. I think that's what has been working for me.
Diego, I have a question. You've mentioned academic writing, and that's the field I have worked in for a long time, helping academic writers with their essays or English exams, for example. Excuse me. And one of the things that has impacted my field faster than I anticipated, actually, there have been great impacts since the last time we did a podcast, fellas, is AI. Right now in the academic space, AI is rewriting, excuse the pun, rewriting everything. The rules, the way we do business, the amount of business coaches like me are getting. It's like business is dropping off because people don't need us in that space. So I'm wondering, how do you foresee AI technology impacting your field in the near or distant future?
Well, I'm totally with you there, Paul. The impacts have been, really, really large. I don't know if that's the right adjective, forgive me, but have been really great. Well, basically, we've seen a shift that anyone trying to get into the industry, and even veterans too, people who have long worked in this industry as human translators, they are getting more and more requests to do what is called machine translation post editing. So the translator is taking the backseat in the production of the content, into bringing content into their native language. And I think that has a great impact because my example I've been translating for almost 10 years, and during that time I developed a lot of skills and then my own voice as a translator. And when I started doing the few times I did machine translation post editing, one thing that I realized is that when you start working for a long time with machine written text, you tend to change the way you write. It's like you lose some of your ideas. You are more focused on making that particular text more readable, then bringing your own expertise into having an active role, right? So I think that's one of the main things I've seen. And when you have people coming into the translation field with no experience and they are asked to do machine translation post editing, which kind of professionals are being trained, right? We have to think that, because myself as an experienced translator, I can identify my own translation skills being modified by prolonged exposure to artificial intelligence. And what can we say about those who didn't acquire that experience, right? They are just developing their own translation and language skills based on the machine produced text. And the field has been definitely been impacted by that, because for example, this year alone, most of my former clients, they have started sending emails asking for quotes about which are my rates for machine translation post editing. So the demand has just boomed, and of course it's not all bad, right? It's that thing about artificial intelligence can do some work that can translate some content that wouldn't otherwise be translated. So, for example, games, they hardly invested in translating help pages, for example, or help guides, and now they can just use AI translation to do some cheap work on that, and that's fine because that's just support documentation. But when you're talking about the actual product of bringing of replicating an experience to a user in another country, well, but I don't think AI can do that. I mean, it can make the text readable mostly, but when you're talking about video games or any sort of creative work and other kinds of work too, which are very specialized, it's not about just words, right? It's about the experience, about the feelings that are evoked when you are playing a game or when you are watching a movie with your subtitles on. And I think that's the impact so far. And but I'm curious to know about the academic aspect of it, Paul. How has it been? People, for example, people are doing research and they're just throwing some thoughts on AI, and AI is producing the papers. That's how it goes.
Well, quite frankly, it's different at the graduate level, but quite frankly, undergraduates are just using AI to write essays and submitting them. And the professors are having a hard time determining what's been AI produced and what has been written by the student. That distinction is really blurred now. And the ability to detect plagiarism has always been an issue for professors. But now, not only is plagiarism an issue, but to the extent to which AI production is plagiarism. So the whole issue is in debate. But while the academic administrations are debating it, the students are using it to write essays prolifically. And it's a little different in academic writing because often the focus of the writing is less on the person's experience, the writer's subjective experience, and more on the objective topic. And that information's out there in the web, right? So that dryness that AI writes with, that you mentioned, this kind of dry, lifeless quality, because it's an aggregate of style and idea, it ends up being this kind of watered down dryness. That's kind of favored in academic writing anyway. So it's a large problem. And I've actually noticed a severe change in both the type of students who seek my help and the type of help they're after. And it's changed a lot because in the past, they actually needed writing skills to compete at the university level, or not compete, but succeed with their writing. And now they kind of don't. So it's left me in a position of rethinking my coaching practice in terms of what skills they need from me and what I can help them with. If they don't need to write, who needs an academic writing coach? So it's completely redrawing the space. Yet to be determined.
I think we need a whole nother episode on AI, to be honest, because we touched on it in one of our episodes, didn't we, like tools and AI and stuff. But yeah, I'm going to be doing a chat about it in a couple of weeks with Shamila Iya, which will be really interesting. And I'm sure I'll learn a lot about AI. But you're among friends here. I think, Diego, we're cautious of just hitting go on ChatGPT and getting something meaningful. Questions, we've got tons of questions. Well, I say tons, we've got some questions coming in, which I'd love for us to answer. So let's get cracking. Thanks for your questions, everyone. Here's first one from Luis. He wants to know our opinions on what are the must-have skills of a great writer in any language. Pete, what do you reckon about that one?
I mean, there's so much you could say about this. If I was to focus on one must-have skill, and also thinking about journalists, but other writers too, it's important. I would talk about clarity first. So, many other skills that are important, but the first thing that you need to develop as a writer, in my opinion, is clarity. So, because if the reader, if the message for the reader is not clear, when the reader reads your work, if the reader becomes confused in any way, then everything else doesn't really matter. Your writing could be beautiful, impactful, but if it's not clear, then the reader's going to lose.
Paul, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I would add something outside of the actual text, and I would say, for me, the most important skill is consistent writing habits. Because if you don't consistently practice the craft of writing, you're never going to develop into a great writer. And I think magic happens when you do it, because I believe it's a physical skill, right? Like speaking is. You're using muscles and brain matter at the same time. And if you don't have a consistent practice, for me, it's first thing in the morning. That's when I write. And my ideas come then. inspiration doesn't hit me all the time anyway. When I'm out doing something, it does occasionally, but the inspiration comes out of the stuff I'm already making. The ideas come from writing ideas. And the more you practice, if you practice consistently, you start to develop a particular style. You start to develop a writing style that is uniquely yours. But if you inconsistently practice, that doesn't seem to grow as well. So I think, never mind productivity, right? I mean, that's kind of speaks for itself. But I think to develop your skill to become a great writer, you have to put in consistent time and make it a part of your life so that the writing ends up reflecting, maybe this is a bit esoteric, but it ends up reflecting your existence in an authentic and deeper way because it's part of your daily life. It's part of who you become, right? So I'm a big proponent of consistent writing skills, wherever and however you manifest those. Mornings, nights, 1 hour, 5 hours, on the bus, on a paper, it doesn't matter. But making it part of your life, I think, is crucial.
Yeah, really interesting perspective, Paul. Paul's famous for his ass in chair method.
Yes, ass in chair.
Yeah, my thoughts are some skills that you really should develop, or that, I don't know, you just either have or you don't, are the joy of difficulty. Like writing should be difficult because it's something that you never reach perfection on. You never like, oh, I can do it now, that's it, just stop. Even the best writers in the world, the most famous best-selling authors, are still constantly learning and evolving and changing their style to try and achieve the to just continue on that journey of enjoyable difficulty. So just embrace the challenge, really. And another one is thick skin. You're going to get criticism and feedback, and if you get too upset by it, then that might make you stop. So it's a good skill to develop, to take considered criticism in a considered way, in a way which you think, is this valid or not? And if it is, then apply it to your work. So yeah, those are the two skills I think are important.
Sort of detaching yourself from the criticism, right?
Yeah, it's not a criticism of you, just it's something that the reader thought about the work, and when you sleep on it, you often wake up and think they're probably right, or if two people said it, they're definitely right. Diego, what are your thoughts? We've got time for one more question after this, I think. What skills writers should develop?
You all are the experts, right? It's really hard to add something to that, especially what Paul said. I think is really gold, right? Developing consistency and starting seeing yourself as a writer. I think that's what really where the magic happens, right? When you stop, having that kind of preciousness about when you are going to write, whether you are inspired or you are feeling like it. If you want to become a great writer, just have to put that behind you. Just have to sit down and write, and that's your ideas will come when you're writing. And also when you are reading, you will start identifying things where you can improve because you are writing. Then you can see, especially as a multilingual writer, you tend to get attached to a particular way of expressing your idea, or how to articulate a sentence. Maybe it's a linking word that you are overusing. And then when you are writing, you are more conscious of that. So when you go and you read another way of putting that same idea, then you have that insight. Oh, I could use that too. And I have a lot of those those aha moments when I'm reading, now that I've been more of an active writer. But to add something from me, I think what could really help you become a great writer is just trying to separate the writing process from the editing process. And in the first stage, you are more, you're just trying to get the work done as best as you can, but trying to get the work done. And the editing is when you really have the opportunity to make the text shine and change things around so that your text reads well. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, we are running down on time a little bit. That answer was, I knew that was going to be a long one, actually. That's why we answered that question first. Perhaps this was a good time to wrap it up, everyone, because we've gone slightly over our 1 hour slot. And I know Diego and everyone else is probably really busy, but if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, you can always just send us a DM. I'll take a look at the questions and try and reply to some of them. But yeah, if you want to ask us a question, you can always reach out on LinkedIn or other social media to Pete, Paul, myself. Diego, where can people find you online apart from?
Well,
of course.
Yeah, basically on LinkedIn. I don't have a presence elsewhere on YouTube or Twitter. This is just LinkedIn is my main channel, and people can reach me out anytime, whether you are a translator or a multilingual writer. I mean, I'm still trying to I'm at the early stages of being a multilingual writer who is actually paid to write, but I'll do my best to help you and share some of the things that worked for me. So yeah, just feel free to reach me out.
Brilliant. Thanks everyone for coming along. It's been brilliant chat, and thanks for all your questions and comments, and
yes.
Cool as always to talk to people around the world.
Thank you, Diego, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was really, really fun, enlightening. Yeah, thank you for your question and for everyone who attended. I hope you enjoyed it.
Great. Thanks, everyone, again. We'll probably be back next month with another episode. Maybe we'll be talking about AI. Who knows? Maybe it's going to be the talk of the town. Hope you have a great weekend wherever you are. And yeah, thanks again for coming.
See you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks,
everyone.